Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Thursday, March the 19th edition of the Scientific Governance and Risk Meeting. We've been having calls daily since Monday. Today is our regularly scheduled call, but we're going to continue the same style of agenda that we've been having during this disaster response. Is that too strong a word? Our aggressive attention we're paying to governance and monetary policy in the last couple of days. Or a few days. Let me talk a bit about the agenda we have set up. There's a lot of individual things to talk about today, as opposed to these longer threads or longer presentations that we've had in the past. So it might, the agenda is subject to change. We might have to bump or possibly go long, but here's the idea. LongForWisdom has suggestions for topics that we got bumped yesterday. Actually, we should probably dig into those very soon. One of these is near and dear to my heart, and made me enormously happy to see that Long brought this up. And the topic is, how do we manage public relations as a community? And anybody who's watching my spicy Twitter feed today will understand that's a situation that we need to address as a group. Actually, I'm not going to get into it. I was going to speechify about this, but I don't want to steal his talking points, so I'll leave that there. We need to consider, we don't need to, we should consider the possibility of onboarding additional stablecoins to spread out any risks that might have been introduced by USDC. I believe the community has pointed out one or two of those already. Cyrus is going to talk about additional types of USDC collateral pools that we can begin to discuss. And this has been a topic for a long time. It would be exciting to see whether this gains traction sooner rather than later, because we not only can we add specific collateral types, we can add collateral types and put them into different buckets and assign different risk parameters to them. So we could have low risk, high risk ETH or something for people with different risk profiles or different appetites for leverage. The same thing applies to USDC. Cyrus will talk about that. Vamsi has returned, and he's going to present a prettier slide deck than he did previously. due to public demand, there will be less words and more pictures. I believe I was as part of that public that was demanding that. Adrian is here to give us a live walkthrough. I believe it's where maybe it'll be on Covan, or maybe it'll be on mainnet. Who knows? Of auctions.makerdao.com, and there's a large discussion to be had around that topic as well. Auctions are happening right now. That's a big deal, and I'm sure we'll be talking about that. In light of, let me do my preambles, and then I'm going to hand it off. Please. I'm begging you, please get on the mic. If you have access to one, ask a question. We don't mind being interrupted. It's important that these conversations are as vibrant as possible. People have opinions, they need to be heard. This is the forum for opinions and for brainstorming and for review and for discovery and for campaigning. If people have ideas about ways that the ecosystem should move or the protocol should move. And then we take those, that data, those threads, and then we bring them to the forums. And once we get to the forums, we make posts, and then those posts turn into proposals. Those proposals turn into action. That's the life cycle that we are enjoying right now. So let's make sure that we keep track of what's happening here. And if you feel strongly about something, make a post about it, because this is open governance and it works, and it has been working. Obviously, it can be improved, and we're always improving it as well, but it works as well. It's working right now. So if you want the protocol to change, make your voice heard, and join us in the forums, because everyone can do it. All right, Cyrus, I'm going to hand it off to you to sort of MC, because I think that we have, I don't know. Are you talking about stuff right now? Let's start with flop auction.
I think we should start off with the flop auctions, because they're running live right now. Maybe some participants in the call are interested in getting to that first, so that they may bid, or I don't know. Just makes more sense, I think.
Sounds good to me. Do you want to start with chit chats, or do you want to start with Vamsi's presentation? Or do you want to start with the demo of the tool?
Maybe Vamsi can give a refresher on how they work, and then we can jump into the demo with Adrian.
Sounds good. You're up, Vamsi.
Sharing my screen.
I'm expecting animations.
Yeah,
no?
Full credit has to go to Soren for preparing this presentation. I'm just going to present it. Basically, we'll just go over like various scenarios in which how like a debt auction starts and ends, like what's going to happen. So like the two key time periods that we have to keep in mind for a debt auction are the bid expiry 6 hours and then the auction expiry 3 days. So based on these two time periods and based on like participation in flop auctions, we could end up in like one of three scenarios, right? So the auction could be completed before 3 days. It could be completed exactly like just around like the 3 day mark, and then it could like go beyond like the 3 day mark. So this is what happens initially, right? So we have maker governors. I made a small mistake like in my last presentation where I said the first bid can be 50,000 DAI for 250 MKR. It's actually, that's where it gets kicked off, and the first bid needs to be 3% less. So maker governors have set the initial amount, right? 250 MKR for 50,000 DAI. That's where it kicks off. And the first bid, as you can see, like in maybe almost immediately or like in some time, in the first 3 day window comes in, and it has to be at least like 242, like bid for at least 242 MKR and submits 50,000 DAI. So the DAI itself immediately goes to the maker protocol, and then it can be used, gets added to the surplus, and it can be used to reconcile the debt. If in the 6 hour following the bid, nobody else adds, nobody else bids on this particular auction, it ends. But let's say a second bid comes in. You can see this bidder here. They are also submitting 50,000 DAI, but this is going to be, it's not 242, it will be like 3% less than 242 here. And this 50,000 DAI gets returned to the first bidder, and then like the 6 hour window restarts, because remember, this is bid expiry. This gets reset every time a new bid comes in. And if no other bid again is placed after this 6 hours, this bidder would win the auction. Third bid, the same thing, 6 hours gets reset. The bid expiry gets reset. How does a bidder win it? By executing deal, and then right after the 6 hour bid expiry, like anyone can actually execute deal, and this is when the system mints MKR and sends it to the bid winner. After this, we can consider the auction to be done. Nothing else can happen here. What if a new bid is placed just before the auction ends? So let's say there is competitive bidding happening, gets reduced, and we are at almost at the 3 day auction expiry mark, maybe like let's say 1 hour before expiry. When a new bid comes in 1 hour before expiry, the auction expiry, the bid expiry would still be 6 hours, but because the auction expiry is reached first, the entire auction ends like right at the 3 day mark. So like just within an hour, yeah. So once the auction expiry is reached, anyone can call deal, even though it's just been like 1 hour since the last bid went in. And as you can see, it's like the 50,000 DAI just gets sent to the previous bidder. So if you're a bidder who's not about to win the auction, you'd get your like 50,000 DAI back, and you can reuse it for a new bid or participate in a different auction entirely. Yeah, and then finally, if what happens if there are no bids in the first 3 days on any of these auctions, keeper will execute tick and will restart the same debt auction. This time the lot size would be increased by 20%. So it will go to like 300 MKR. And I believe that would mean the price would be set to 166 DAI per MKR. And then this is going to continue every 3 days until at least one bid comes through. So that is how the debt auction is going to work. Are there any questions?
So just to clarify, so if there is a bid, the 6-hour timer restarts in flop auctions. So it ends 6 hours after the last bid, and people can, if they keep bidding, it keeps pushing the clock up.
Basically, it's simple. Whichever comes first, either the bid expiry or the auction expiry. So if we are well within the 3-day mark, the bid expiry is going to decide the final bid. But if you're like almost if there's been competitive bidding throughout 3 days, and then we are somehow like near the 3-day mark, then if that comes first, that will automatically decide who wins. But yeah, like I think
Yeah, so it keeps moving out there. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks. And actually, so this isn't the case for collateral auctions.
The only reason it's not the case is because collateral auctions use the same time period for both bid expiry and auction expiry. Both are set to 6 hours. Unlike flop auctions.
Right. Thanks.
Yeah, shall I stop sharing and shall we continue with the next item on the agenda?
I think so. If anybody has any questions, though, type them in the sidebar. I know it takes us a few seconds for some of them to bubble up sometimes, but maybe we'll hand it off to you, Adrian, for a walkthrough.
Sure thing. Just give me a second. So yeah, I'll be sharing my screen, and I'd like to take the next like 10 minutes to just go through the UI again. Let me find the window. This is it. Some of you were here yesterday and you probably saw the quick teaser that I gave. There hasn't been a lot of changes since, but we can take this time to go through it a little bit more calmly. And differently than yesterday, do interrupt me if you have any questions and we can just tackle them as we go. And whenever we decide that it's good enough, then we can just cut it. So the first thing I do want to show is live auctions happening right now on mainnet. And before showing anything, another disclaimer that we did build this app in like 7 days. So it is beta. We're still working through some of the little details and accessibility and making things responsive and et cetera, so just keep that in mind as you're looking at this, as you're using this, etc. But let's get into it. Right, so I'll skip everything at the top. I'll cover that in the next demonstration. For now, what I really want to touch on are the current ongoing auctions that you can see here. This is all real data happening right now on mainnet. Looking back at Vamsi's presentation about the difference between the TAO and the TTL, as you can see, that is clearly stated in these cards as well. The darker number being the expiration of this last dent bid, and the gray number being the TAO of the whole auction. One thing after yesterday's call, we did introduce a glossary view so that you have a bit of a description of what each term on the screen means. Do keep in mind that we're still working on some of this text. So there might be a typo here and there. We'll make sure to have it all looking properly in the next few hours. A few other additions that might help you inspect what is going on mainnet live are the filters. So of course, right now it doesn't really apply, but you'll be able to display only ongoing auctions, or if you are a user participating in those auctions, you can do that here. If you're a user participating in the auctions using a keeper and you're not able to connect with that same address to this UI, you can input the address of your keeper here, and you should be able to filter all auctions based on that. Or the more obvious one, you can filter by ID as well. Yeah, this is pretty cool just to look at. If anyone is curious of what's happening right now, do go to this URL and check it out. I think next, what I can show is give a quick demonstration of how it works to bid. And again, this is great. It's great that Vamsi gave a presentation right before this, because this is like a demonstration of the mechanisms that he just explained. But right now I am connected to Kovan, hence my large balances. And given that this loads, while this loads, there you go. You're able to deposit and withdraw from your locked amount of DAI in the VAT, which is the amount that you get to participate in auctions with. As you can see, there's a little transaction state here. With this wallet that I'm using, I already authorized the allowance transactions which are required. I showed this yesterday. If you connect with a cold wallet, you'll have to do these 3 initial transactions to be able to unlock your balances. Yeah, there we go. So what happens here is, let's say you are a bidder and you've done the authorizations, you've deposited some DAI in the VAT, and you now have a balance. You can go ahead and find an auction that you want to participate in. For example, these auctions are only in the kick state. That means that they have been started, but there has not been any bids yet. While this other one is an auction that has been started and there has been already one bid, and you get to outbid that person. So let's do that. If I press the instant bid, hopefully the text here is explanatory enough, but essentially you're putting the smallest next step bid possible. Yeah, this text will probably need to change. It's not that accurate, but we can do this right now. And once this transaction ends, we should see an update in the UI. There we go. This happens and it updates. So now it shows that you're the current winning bidder. This is the bid that I just put in. I didn't have to put any amounts, so that was that. You can also do a custom bid, of course. I'm gonna do it to this other one above. If I try to do it anywhere near the lot size, I get this error, which is part of how the bidding works. So I have to do at least 3% less. I believe if I do like this, that should be enough. And here, of course, like you can put any bid that you like. So I can go, let's see, I can do this. There you go. And that should work. Yeah, confirmed. There we go. Current winning bidder. The one thing to keep in mind once you are an active bidder in this UI is that these filters become more relevant for you. Since this is Kovan, we've been running it for a good few days. So we have a few auctions that has already completed and has been dealt already. So this is pretty much how it looks like. I'm also the winner of this auction, so the MKR was transferred to my wallet already. There might be, yeah, these are auctions that has already ended, and I am the current winner, but it hasn't been dealt yet. So once I press this button, the MKR is going to be minted and sent to my account. Users are not expected to be pressing this button. We have a few bots that are doing this in case something happens to those bots, or in case it's not happening quick enough for you and you're the winner of an auction. You can call that deal at any time from the UI.
Adrian, can I add a note regarding the minting of MKR?
Yeah.
So when you're the successful bidder, there's no transaction incoming of MKR to your address. There's just a change of your balance in the MKR smart contract, right? Updating to your address. So that's the only thing you'll see. And clearly when you're actually the winning bidder, you'll see a mint event in the MKR smart contract, right? So anyway, if you just check your balance right away, you'll see that you'll have a balance updated without having any transactions incoming.
Right, yeah, that's a good point. That kind of concludes the demo of interacting with the auctions. Before I go to the next section, any questions about this? I haven't been reading the messages, so maybe someone can read those out for me. All right, cool.
Well, I can read some of them. I encourage anybody with a microphone not to be shy, though. Devin Walsh, there's only 13 auctions going on right now. Is that true? And he asks, how do we see if there are any auctions with 0 bids, and when will more auctions kick off?
Yeah, I think Cyrus did a good job of answering in the chats. It sounds like because the liquidations and the collateral auctions happened kind of over time, the auctions will happen over time as well. So yeah, I think I got my question. Thanks.
Sure. It's good for posterity, though. The chats frequently don't make it into the historical record. So
okay.
I'm trying to. Losses accrued, look for auction. All right. So if that's it, Cyrus, do you want to pick it up right now?
Yeah, just a closing note. Work on this UI hasn't ended. We're going to keep on working the next few days. I got a very simple, quick list of top priorities. We're going to continue finishing the current UI, making sure there are no bugs, making sure it works as expected and is performant enough. We expect more than 100 parallel auctions today and tomorrow. We are having good conversations about the performance of our cash API, and they're going to work on improving that. And once that's done, we're going to start having conversations about flip auctions, so collateral auctions at some point in the future.
Timely, because Artem just asked that question. So the plan is then to expand to flip and flap then?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Thanks
for that, Adrian. That's great. Sorry, so what do you think? USDC?
Sure. And so any last questions or any maybe last discussion points on the flop auctions?
Well, actually, I have a question. Have we seen a complete life cycle occur yet in the auctions, or is it still getting kicked off?
No, it'll take 6 hours to see the complete life cycle. But you can see the system debt go down in real time on DAI stats, because every time a bid is placed, the system recognizes that some of the debt is paid down.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question, whether we have any indication of the health or the success of the mechanism so far, or is it too early to call? Was that tempting the gods? Does anybody want to make a suggestion or offer an opinion?
Yeah, we should probably not tempt the gods. Yeah, let's maybe circle back on that tomorrow.
All right then. I'm not even going to try and pronounce that name. Points out that the syndicate is also operating right now, and there's a link to a Google Doc. You can also just Google MakerDAO backstop syndicate and have a look at what they're up to. The barrier to entry there is far lower than the official interface. I don't know if I should be calling it the official one, but yeah, so allow people to make their own decisions about which tool they prefer to use. Cyrus, back to you.
Yeah, and there's one other interesting point is the crypto markets are seeing a bit of a rally right now, and so there's likely to be some distortion between the auction price for the MKR and the secondary market price for MKR, which may be interesting to note.
Yeah, it's bizarre, the conflict I'm feeling right now with the markets rallying, so we don't get to see the auction mechanism work as effectively as I expected it to. But I guess I'll take a market rally.
There's actually this interesting edge case with the auctions, where if the market keeps rallying, then you'll just keep seeing bids and bids, and so even this very first round of auctions might take it could conceivably take 1 or 2 days, because if the market just keeps going up, then you'll see more and more people take advantage of the long bid duration and the fact that the auction lasts 3 days.
Yeah, so 3 days is the upper bound then?
Right. So it's not really that you'll see 1 or 2 bids and then the auction ends necessarily. If the market keeps rallying, it could just keep being extended.
Yeah, that's good for us though, right? So
yes, that is definitely good for the system, but just pointing it out that there are some edge cases where these auctions will not end today.
More precisely, it's good for MKR holders. I mean, so long as people are bidding, the system's recapitalizing, but the higher things go up, the less MKR gets minted, which means less dilution in MKR.
Right. Okay. So maybe we can move on to the USDC discussion. So there's been an enormous amount of discussion and chatter in the forums. Several good threads going on. I'll post the link to one right now in the sidebar. This is just repeating the theme that I've been harping on for the past 2 or 3 days now, which is trying to have the community target a specific use case for the USDC collateral type. As I've been mentioning, possibly really the primary or initial reason for adding the collateral type in my eyes was to provide liquidity to auction keepers who face a shortage of DAI during the flip auctions and potentially even the flop auctions. Because DAI liquidity was obviously a huge critical factor to the zero bidding from last week. At the same time, though, because of the severe dislocation in the DAI price, trading up to 108, 109, a lot of regular keepers are using the USDC collateral type to help arbitrage that DAI price back down. And while it's not easy to draw perfect causation, the DAI price has improved significantly since USDC was added, and about almost 6 million DAI has already been generated in a very short period of time. And tracking some of this DAI on chain, it's easy to see that a lot of this DAI is hitting DEXs and secondary lending platforms. And so I think it's reasonable to assume that the DAI being generated is helping the is helping the DAI price. The downside, though, is that we're rapidly eating away at the available debt ceiling for USDC. So it was set to 20 million, and there's now only 14 million of room left. In such an if we suffer another extreme price drop, then auction keepers would now have reduced liquidity capacity from the USDC collateral type. So this poses a bit of a problem, and a few different solutions, a few different ideas have been batted around in the forums. Personally, I think the most elegant one is to add a separate USDC collateral type package, so there'll be two different USDCs in MakerDAO, but with different risk parameters. One can be set in such a way to be allocated for peg arbitrage, and the other one can be, at least we can attempt to reserve it for auction keeper liquidity. I think that, and the methodology for doing that is by trying to price out one use case with the other. So right now, what some of the risk guys are working on is trying to estimate what the ROI on DAI peg arbitrage might be based on capital, based on DAI requirements, based on the length of time that a potential trade might have to be on, and then basically increase the stability fee above that number. And therefore, it would become economically inefficient for keepers to use that second collateral package for peg arbitrage. So question is, how high does that stability fee need to be? Not quite sure right now. I think kind of initial estimates are maybe ranging in like the 50% plus stability fee range. So if there was if you could borrow DAI at a 50% stability fee, and then making some assumptions on how long it would take to close out the trade, then potentially it's not worthwhile to sell DAI at $1.03, $1.04, for example. And there's also a separate question of why would we want to cap the amount of debt ceiling for the peg arbitrage? Why not just allow as much USDC as possible so the peg can quickly return to $1? The answer there is, if that's the case, then we're likely to see perpetual day-to-day exposure of USDC in the collateral pool. This is something that potentially might be undesirable for the community. Versus the auction keeper USDC, it would only be in the system for very short bursts of time, potentially just a couple days, if that. And therefore, there would be significantly less long-term exposure. So when discussing the DAI peg version that would have daily exposure, governance may not want to accommodate too high of a debt ceiling. So these are kind of the main points. I don't think there's really too much to present, or in that case, I think just trying to open this up to some freestyle discussion, gather people's thoughts and feedback. And
there's a good question in the sidebar. Maybe you can talk to us a bit. Like, can you well, I'll read out the question. Why keep two separate facilities for USDC rather than just keep a single one with a high stability fee and treat it as only an emergency liquidity for auction keepers? So can you talk a bit about the two specific use cases, the two demographics that would be interested in two different types of USDC?
Yeah, so yeah, that was another idea, is to just increase the stability fee on the current one. Given that the original use case was for auction keepers, that might make sense. I think that the community has, I can't speak to the long-term risks, but I think in the short term, the improvement to the DAI peg has been very welcomed. I think everybody's feeling a little bit more at ease, given that the DAI price is doing a bit better. In terms of demographics, I don't really think there's a significant difference. I think keepers are fairly flexible in how they want to make money in this system. So keepers that are selling DAI versus keepers bidding in auctions it's likely to be a lot of overlap. This is more of a risk question on what kind of USDC exposure does governance want to have. And in one case, it's perpetual day-to-day exposure, and the other one, it's very short bursts of time.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the reason I asked is that we would be much more comfortable with keeping this only as an emergency facility. And, you know, while the bringing the DAI price back down is certainly welcomed, I view that as less pressing, and the potential, you know, blacklist risk of USDC as collateral in the system on like a regular ongoing basis, to me isn't worth the trade-off.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. Actually, at the very least, I think we need some more discussion on that DAI peg use case before kind of having it sink in as this permanent fixture.
Yeah.
Sure, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, so on the peg case, that does also help in times of like liquidity crunch, right? Because although obviously we want the auctions to be successful, we also want like vault holders to like close their vaults before they get liquidated, and they're going to be more willing to do that if the peg is closer to 1 rather than if it's high. Like obviously they want to do it anyway, but you know it's gonna hurt them a lot less essentially if they can do it with DAI close to $1 rather than DAI at like 106, 107 or something.
Yeah, there's an inherent systemic risk with arbitrage based on USDC, since it's not going to go up in price with the rest of the crypto markets. For example, when someone arbitrages the DAI peg using USDC, there's implicitly they're depending on the DAI peg to come back down to where they can profitably close out their position. And if DAI peg doesn't come down and fees accumulate, now there's going to be a bigger liquidity crunch of those people saying, oh crap, I've got to close out my position before it goes negative. And so you know, it's sort of like delaying the risk in a way. And you've got to watch the exposure to that.
I think I see it more as like spreading the risk out, right? Like you kind of spread the crunch out across like a larger timescale, which is in some ways what you
spread
want.
the crunch and you hope markets recover, but if markets don't recover, it could be worse, right? Like
potentially.
You know, it's a gamble, right? There's a level of gambling in there.
Yeah. That's
true. So I think the takeaway is that there's definitely a clear use case for the peg arbitrage version. We just haven't maybe spent enough time pricing the risk and figuring out what kind of exposure we want. That's all. And I think we have to get to that sooner rather than later. And then for the auction keeper liquidity, that's something that the exposure risk is significantly lowered, because we would pretty much never expect to have any USDC in the collateral portfolio unless it was an extreme situation, at which point you would wanted it. You would definitely want to assume that risk. But right now we're coming up to a position where we may not even have the auction liquidity if we need it. So governance is gonna have to do some work to sort these issues out.
Are we able to estimate like what like the debt ceiling we need for auction keepers is? Someone else was working on that. I can't remember.
I mean, I think I don't know if we have like a great way to estimate, but I think looking at the liquidation price points and seeing how much DAI needs to be liquidated and trying to estimate the initial starting pool of DAI for keepers as a whole, those are all kind of research points that need to be undertaken.
Hey Cyrus, I have a question. Regarding the peg arbitrage version, so if we keep like a USDC open, and even if we lower the stability fee, the day-to-day exposure to USDC you're talking about, is there a number to which kind of risk would be comfortable keeping the debt ceiling, to which we know that it will have day-to-day exposure to it, but it won't be so overwhelming that it will kind of, affect the other factors? So meaning like we keep it in place, but we keep it small enough. So then one of the pros is that it would like mitigate and help, bring the peg back during future crunches, but it also wouldn't be so big that it would create new opportunities.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's kind of the $1 million question. So it depends on what you're trying to optimize for MakerDAO. So let's say for some reason the 20 million was maxed out, and then all of a sudden that something terrible happens and MakerDAO has to eat that entire $20 million loss. Would Maker survive? I think so. I think that we would see eventually flop auctions take that number down. But is that desirable in any sense? Not really. So I think that the solution involves trying to estimate some sort of likelihood that such an event might happen. So there's a huge difference if that risk is something in the order of 5 to 10% happening over the next year versus less than 1%. So these are kind of just like risk reward probabilistic trade-offs that governance is going to have to eventually make. And then if they can do that, then if they can express their risk preferences, then from that you could derive like a debt ceiling that would closely reflect their tolerance.
I think part of the, as I mentioned this, part of the, well, not danger, but something to consider with changing the stability fee on the current package for USDC is that the people that are currently arbitraging the peg presumably have done it assuming that there will be like 15% or whatever it is, 25% stability fee. Whereas if we go and double it, they'll probably not be incredibly happy about it. So.
Yeah, that probably wouldn't be a good idea. If governance wanted to reduce that peg arbitrage version, then potentially lowering the debt ceiling and then taking it from there would probably be the best idea.
Yeah, so I mean, is the main thing we need to kind of figure out like the split of debt ceilings we want between the two, like whether we want like, because I kind of feel like no one's sort of super keen on increasing it like over 20 million for like the total. So
well, I think it's just early, right? I don't think we've had time to really digest what's been happening lately. There's still a ton of data analysis that needs to go on. Even the effects of this of the peg arbitrage still need to be properly analyzed. So for example, there was one criticism several days ago that was saying that if keepers are only minting DAI from USDC when it's above the peg and then trying to cover their positions at $1, then the net effect could potentially just be neutral and we're not actually achieving much in the long run. I think the argument is that like when it comes to ETH as a collateral type, people are willing to mint DAI when it's above the peg, when it's below the peg, in all sorts of environments. But if the keeper use case for minting DAI from USDC is very narrow, then it may not actually be giving MakerDAO as tangible benefits as we might have hoped. So I mean, I think there's just still a lot of processing to do with all this.
Its primary use case, without question, would definitely be when the DAI price breaks above $1 to help pull it down. It's probably not as useful today until the markets mature to help pull it up if it goes below $1.
Right. So if they're going to mint DAI when it's above $1 and then just try to buy that DAI back at $1, is the net effect that significant, the net benefit?
The point is it spreads it, right? Like the idea is like in a crash, everybody wants to close vaults. So
Right.
all the vaults are closing, everyone's shutting down. The DAI from ETH is going down like a whole bunch. The point is after like a massive crash that we've seen, like some ETH holders will be more like risk averse than others. Like some will open CDBs again, or sorry, vaults again, like fairly quickly afterwards. Some will take longer, some like will never come back, right? And like slowly other people will come in as the prices, like the general price gets less volatile. So you're gonna have a situation where the DAI that was backed with ETH is backed by USDC in the short term, and then slowly that should move back to ETH as the confidence in ETH as an asset improves again, right?
Yeah, so I guess it would dampen the volatility in the meantime, right?
That's what I think. Yeah, that's I think the idea, right? Like it dampens the liquidity issue in the meantime and like spreads it over a longer period. And you can potentially get into that worst case if the confidence in ETH does not increase again, then you're in like more trouble, or like still in the same amount of trouble. But it spreads it out. It's like
yeah, I tend to agree with you. I was just, to be clear, I was just putting up some arguments that I've heard from the community. But yeah, I tend to agree with you that it dampens volatility in the short run, and it makes things, it smooths it out.
Volatility dampening. We saw yesterday a link that was circulating that allowed people to swap from an ETH vault to a USDC vault in times of volatility. And I'm still trying to wrap my head around what that implies for the system. Have you had a chance to give that any thought, Cyrus, like whether this is a good thing or a bad thing for the ecosystem?
I saw that link. I don't have time to properly explore, but I know Primosh and Lev were having a chat about it in the forum. I'm not sure if either of them are on this call or are willing to be put on the spot to talk about it.
Yeah, I can talk about it. So basically, what this tool allows you as a vault is that you can basically swap collateral without really closing your position, in sense that you need to buy DAI on the market with Ether that you just withdraw from your vault. But basically the flash loan is used to repay your vault, and then you just do Ether to USDC trade, and then you open a new vault with USDC collateral and the issue DAI, and you repay the flash loan, which essentially means that you as a user, as a vault, you're not really putting any liquidity. You're not depending on liquidity of ETH to DAI, which is great, right? Because that liquidity is needed by auction keepers and by market makers. This essentially means that vaults will put less pressure on ETH to DAI liquidity, which is a great thing. The only thing I was thinking about is that you might have, well collateralized vaults which are not really endangering the system, but they might just see, this really nice tool, and they would not neutralize their position by using this collateral swap, which means there would be a high debt ceiling on USDC if they would decide so. This is just one thing we need to consider. If we see a high usage of this, we'll need to address the USDC debt ceiling. Otherwise, it's a very positive tool for the whole system, in my opinion.
Yeah, it seems very compelling, but I don't understand it. So, Matthew.
But it sells your ETH, right? Or yeah, Matthew is asking the same question.
Yeah, because I like it when people actually reference things that exist in the real world. So, Matthew, can you tell us about repo substitution? Is that what this is?
I mean, well, fundamentally, a maker credit DAI facility is a repurchase agreement. In the treasury markets, this exists already. And whenever you have a repo outstanding with collateral A, treasury, with a yield to maturity of just pick a number, X, depending on who has your repo facility, sometimes you're not allowed to do substitutions, and sometimes you can do 5. And almost no cases can you do an unlimited number of substitutions. And this concept you're talking about, where it's in effect a flash loan refi out substitution, is exactly what it is. the point of hitting that USDC limit is exactly the point, because you might hit that limit. It might go from whatever it is right now, 8 million outstanding, the credit limit. I don't pick up the number, and you might hit 19 million for one block, and then it go back down to 8 million, just purely as a flash loan. I mean, take
there's
that
so
back.
much to
Even
explore here.
If it's in one block, if it's not even in one block that happens, you don't even hit the limit. You can only hit the limit. If I say that, it's all a flash loan, so it all happens simultaneously in one you're still constrained by that debt ceiling, but it's a good thing, is the summary of having this substitution system.
And does it close out your ETH position? Like if you go from an ETH vault owner to a USDC vault owner, then, well, you no longer have any ETH exposure, right? So if you're doing this in a market decline, I guess you should be aware that it would be effectively closing out your long ETH exposure.
Yeah, exactly. So normally what you would do as a user, if there wouldn't be any ETH to DAI slippage, you would just close your vault, right? Because why would you open USDC vault and pay extra fees? But in this case, when you have ETH to DAI slippage and it's trading well above $1, you would just release your Ether and swap it to USDC because there is no slippage there, and then open USDC vault and issue DAI and repay the flash loan. So this makes only sense when you have a liquidity issue, which is actually great, right? Because those vaults will be saving them and themselves, and there'll be less, exposure on the system, less work for market makers, less work for auction keepers.
And how does it swap the ETH to USDC?
Yeah, it basically goes on a DEX. It trades ETH to USDC, and then puts USDC in a vault and issues DAI and repays flash loan. At least this is how I imagine it. I didn't study it the whole day, to be honest.
I mean, that might be the step-by-step component, and I haven't researched it at all, so forgive the commentary and forgive the ignorance on it, but you're just fundamentally adding collateral at the exact same moment that you're removing existing collateral without having a liquidation event. All simultaneously. So it's just a complete, it's a collateral substitution, a complete replacement. So you're unencumbering one asset and encumbering another.
Yeah, like the part of that, as I understand, is you flash loan yourself USDC, you use that to open USDC vaults, you take that DAI, use it to close your ETH vaults, you then sell the ETH you got out of your ETH vault for USDC, which you use to then pay back the flash loan. Right. I think that's the...
I guess maybe I'm just digging around because it sounds like this is great, and great makes me nervous because flash loans are supposed to be great as well. So I think that, I don't know, it's worth exploring the edge cases here. It's an interesting development though.
Well, it seems like it just sort of swaps ETH DAI price pressure with ETH USDC. So it's a trade-off, but it's a trade-off that's good for us.
There might also be some issues with collateralization requirements, right? If you're going from 150 to 125, it's fine. If you go into the reverse, may not be possible.
You can't go back again as easily, but you can go. Yeah.
It's also, I think, useful in scenarios where, let's say, a vault owner actually has the cash to pay back their debt, but DAI is trading much higher above its peg. So they could buy USDC instead, lock it up in a vault, generate DAI by themselves, and then pay off their vault and keep their Ether safe. And then over time, once the peg recovers, they can recycle that USDC for DAI over time. So it almost gives vault owners an option who have the capital to pay back their own debt without having to sell Ether, do it with USDC. So then they're not even interacting with the USDC market. It's like they just have the capital themselves that they can use to pay back the vault.
Yeah, it moves the demand for DAI liquidity like into the future, right? Based on into like USDC vaults where people want to close at some point soon because it's like 15% SF, but not so soon. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's the key theme these days, right? Flatten the curve. So fits that.
Really good joke. We have still some topics to get to, and we're hitting the top of the
one last point for the USDC regarding the debt ceiling for the PEG arbitrage version. There are some tools out there that show, or at least estimate the amount of sell pressure, and I guess the amount of bids above $1 on the USDC DAI pair, and governments can estimate roughly how much DAI they would need to sell against USDC to get the peg back to $1. It's posted a little bit further down in that forum thread I linked earlier. And I think the number as of right now, I think there's roughly about 5 million worth of DAI being bid above $1. I don't know how updated, like how up to the minute that chart is, but still an interesting data point for consideration of the debt ceiling. That's all. Yeah, okay, let's move on to other topics.
All right, thanks, Cyrus. We can obviously circle back. We might have time for a little bit of a Q&A later. I'm not entirely sure, but Long, I'm gonna hand this off to you, and maybe just let you pick which one you want to start with, PR
yeah,
or onboarding.
I guess we'll stay in like stablecoin land. So there's been some kind of discussion about adding a different stablecoin to spread the risk of obviously having like permission to collateral in the system. So yeah, that's essentially the question. Like, Cyrus, do you want to kind of share your thoughts on that before? I don't know. I mean, does anyone else want to share their thoughts?
I mean, given that this was a community idea, I'd like to hear from kind of some of the people who were proposing this, if they're on the call. I don't really have much context behind this idea.
So let's put some, or let's establish the context here. So the idea presumably is that as we all know that, well, I was going to start promoting DAI, I won't do it. So there's a range of stable coins out there. Each one of these stable coins has pros and cons associated with them, different risk profiles, and the assumption, correct me if I'm wrong, LongForWisdom, is that USDC has a very specific risk profile, and that we could potentially augment the portfolio by having additional coins with different types of risk profiles that would potentially be subject to different jurisdictional oversight, some things like that.
I'm not sure people have thought too much about the differences in risk profiles between them. I think it's more just like a kind of general, like, well, at least if we have two, then if one decides to misbehave, then the like loss isn't as big, right? I don't think anyone's like done the risk analysis in detail for like any of the others versus USDC. I think it kind of comes from just like we want to diversify risk like where we can, right? We need stable coins because we need the liquidity, but it doesn't necessarily have to be all one stable coin. Yeah.
Well, I guess it comes down to what are the list of options, right? There's to be a fundamental, or there has to be analysis of these individual projects to figure out where those risks exist, possibly. What would be the options? Well, what do people put out there as suggestions?
So TUSD is probably should be the first one we look at, seeing as they have like obliged to be collateral. I did that ages ago. So I know PAX has been mentioned as well, but I don't know that much about it. Tether has also been mentioned, though I don't think that's a good idea personally. So yeah.
I think one of the other questions we need to address, well, so this is where we come back to the apathy, urgency, and denial stages that we go through. So we're into urgency, and I can feel apathy already kind of creeping up, like, oh, markets are recovered, let's just all go back to whatever it is we were doing before. But obviously we need to maintain this thread, right? And the door has been opened to additional collateral types or stablecoin collateral types. Figuring out what the cadence is and how to start evaluating these things are going to be tough, right? But maybe the question is, are we still in this sort of responsive situation where we're looking for sources of additional stable liquidity, and the time is now to get stuff done, or is the time now for us to refocus our efforts, our collateral onboarding efforts, to maybe just prioritize stable coins above other assets that might have been on the list?
I'm not sure personally. Like, my kind of feeling towards it is that like kind of in the emergency that we needed liquidity, we did like the easiest thing, which is onboard like a block of USDC, which we can use as liquidity. Eventual goal is that we're fully diversified over like a whole bunch of like asset classes, right? But in the kind of vein of like 2 stable coins is better than one. Like, so 20 million debt ceiling spread across 2 stable coins is potentially better than 20 million in 1 stable coin. So like, even absent, like potentially absent other risk, like even other risk analysis, like that is something that could be true.
Well, that's also a liquidity issue too, right? Like these collateral types aren't very useful unless people can get in and out of them and that they can trade with them somewhere, right? So
yeah, that is true.
I have no idea what USD and PAX look like on the open markets.
Yeah, admittedly, me too.
Brian points out that PAX has $100 in Uniswap right now. That might not be enough.
Yeah, Circle is, or rather, USDC. That's definitely the highest, unless I'm missing something in terms of liquidity between DAI.
Well, that's the gold standard, right? Like they have
sure.
the exchange, so obviously liquidity is not an issue.
Yeah. So, go ahead.
Well, quick question regarding us using USDC as a stablecoin for liquidity. When's the kind of proverbial dust settles? Like, are we going to know whether it was effective or created like unforeseen effects, like after one more week, after one more month? I guess I want to know, like, when were we out of the clear with the first stablecoin before we put a lot of work into adding much more?
I mean, the DAI price is coming down pretty nicely, so seems like it's working.
Yeah, well, that's the problem. It's like we have these confounding variables, and we make changes during frothy events in the ecosystem, and then looking back and going, okay, well, we did things, and then something happened, and therefore the thing we did made the thing happen. And I feel Rich or other Riches concerned that we don't have a clear audit trail between our activities and the results that we were hoping to see. And so I would very much like to see something in the next couple of weeks that just at least heavily correlates the activities of adding these new collateral types with actual restoration of the peg and additional liquidity in the auctions and all the rest of it. But this is something that we've been talking about for a long time in these calls. With our cadence and with our activities, week to week, we pull levers, we change parameters, and then the next week we see things happen in the market, and we assume that those two things are directly related. And personally, I am not convinced that that's always the case. And so it obviously behooves the community to ensure that we understand completely what the effect of USDC was in the next couple of weeks, and then continue to refine the parameters that we have. So it's another thing that we need to understand is that all of this is subject to change. And from week to week, these levers will be added to our polling mechanism, right? And that's something we haven't really talked about in the fog of war right now, is that we have weekly polls, and those weekly polls are for basically MCD, ETH, and the stability fee for SED. But now we have additional collateral types, and so those pools will begin to tweak those parameters as well.
Can I reframe that question real quick around USDC? Because there's a discussion around effectiveness for stablecoins. Using something like USDC as collateral, I don't think the issue or the question is it effective? Because if you allow this sort of perpetual put to be available where users can swap in and mint more DAI and basically take a put on the peg and hope that in the event that the peg comes down, they'll have made an arbitrage profit. That is a very clear, simple economic use case that I don't think is very much so in question of is it going to be effective. I think there's a different question around stablecoins as collateral and the precedence of using USDC, which is more of, somebody asked, when are you out of the clear with USDC and how much of a correlation do you need to see? I mean, the question is, the risk of USDC is never going to change. The risk of USDC is not something that goes down as you see more data. The risk of USDC is what it is, in that you have this potential custodial risk, you have this potential blacklist risk.
But the question is risk versus reward, right? And if we don't know what the reward is, we can't measure the value of the risk, right?
For sure. So how much of a reward there is definitely a question, but I think you're likely to see that it will be effective. I just want to level set that using USDC as a collateral type and precedence for other stablecoins in particular is not so much about how well does it work. It's not like if USDC works well and people use it for arbitrage use cases, that means you should allow other stablecoins as collateral. I think it's more about having a holistic discussion, evaluation of the qualitative risks associated with using something like USDC, and then level setting.
I think I'm wrapping my head around it. You're saying just simply because we've adopted one type of risk over here, we shouldn't automatically go, oh, well, then we need to diversify to different types of those same risks over there, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and you've also adopted it for a specific time and a specific problem with a specific solution. That doesn't necessarily mean that you've done a blanket okay of this is now a low risk scenario.
That's a great perspective. There's all kinds of cognitive traps and fallacies here, and I fell into that one immediately too. I think it's worth considering. So just because we've done one thing that might have some downsides, let's do a bunch of other things that have different downsides to even out the downside of that first thing. And maybe that's not just the logical next step. Maybe we need to reconsider what is the full intention of the first thing that we did with USDC, and then figure out mitigation strategies there instead.
So using the USDC stability fee, I think is a way we can totally control how short-term USDC is being used. Like if we go back into like a bull market, USDC should go back to zero pretty quickly. And it should only, if we keep the stability fees the same, like maybe it may come up again if we start having big drops, but I think we can keep it around in the system and just sort of use it as this shock absorber for large drops. And we can, if we really don't want to keep it around long term, we can just crank up the stability fee to keep the window shorter and shorter.
I think the issue, Sam, is that we don't know exactly how USDC is going to behave. And when we rushed it in this manner, we didn't do a full analysis of the situation. So it's hard to say how we should proceed in the future, but keeping it, like we brought it in for emergency response, and we don't really know if it's working. We think it is, sort of, but I don't think that shouldn't have any precedent for the future necessarily, besides for emergency response.
But I'm saying the way we have the parameters set now, it should only go above 0 when there's emergencies like now.
Not necessarily. I mean, you know, the whole point, it's been discussed to add stable coins for as long as I've been aware of Maker, where it was more of a market maker opportunity. And it just happened to be used this time during an extreme crunch and extreme price compression or elevation of DAI. But it's a market maker tool. It always, that was the envisionment of it, is the lower you have your collateralization ratio, the more you could lever it up to capture an arbitrage opportunity. And I agree with you about the risk premium, stability fee, whatever. You know, the higher that number is, but if you're able to capture, you know, a 2% arbitrage and it costs you 1/4% of the money to make it happen, you know, whether or not that stability fee was 2% or 20 or 100, if you can capture that arbitrage, you're going to take it.
Yes, but sort of the time frame gets contracted the higher the stability fee is.
Completely.
So we can have control is what I'm saying.
I kind of want to throw out there that whatever the debt ceiling is for USDC is probably going to be the loss that's incurred. If USDC were to have its own black swan event, say the, you know, auditors came back and said that, you know, it's not fully collateralized, the price goes down to 30 cents per USDC. People are going to max out that whatever debt ceiling cap we have and exchange that for DAI almost immediately. We don't have an oracle and the price is hard coded to 1. So expect that within that 6 to 8 hours that we've got between governance making
liquidations are frozen for USDC right now. So conceivably there would be time for extra protocol measures to develop a plan, so to speak.
Right. Well, we wouldn't liquidate anyways because the price, we don't have a price article that would trigger liquidations. I'm saying that if somebody's holding a pile of USDC that drops to 30 cents, they transfer it into the adapter and they get a lot of DAI that's worth more than the bag that they're holding at the time. And that's a huge arbitrage opportunity right there.
Yeah, that's actually, I forgot to mention that earlier. That is one of the huge risks for the auction keeper. Collateral version is that if we just have a collateral type with, say, 30 million debt ceiling, but with no usage, if something were to ever happen to USDC, then all of a sudden that creates a huge risk to the protocol. And then potentially, hopefully in the future, we could maybe see situations where the debt ceiling could be toggled on and off significantly easier, maybe through the so-called instant access modules that were discussed several months ago or something like that. But yeah, right now it is a risk, but hopefully it can be mitigated in the future, right? Just don't have
Gonzalo on our team has actually been working on kind of like a governor or throttle to kind of have a global debt ceiling for a collateral type, but then maybe have smaller amounts so that you know, every hour or something, if we bump up against it, it moves itself up, but it doesn't allow people to flow 100% into a debt ceiling all in one short period of time. So that's something that could be considered.
I'm just going to piggyback on this concern and state what I think most crypto anarchists, pure decentralization advocates are going to say, which is that as a collateral type, we always risk the black swan of having our joint adapter blacklisted and the entire collateral just disappearing out from under us. And so we need to also price in that risk or consider, you know, limiting debt ceilings based on that risk or keeping them very low, except for times when we're in an emergency where we have a sort of instant access module to flip it up to something much higher. Yeah, so I mean, there's lots of discussion that if we weren't in an emergency, we would have all had this discussion ahead of time, but I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, I agreed. Like we have to pay back $5.3 million in these flop auctions right now. But if we lost 20 million in USDC in a flash, you know, that would make that look like peanuts.
So does that mean there's an argument for using it more as a peg management tool and not as an auction liquidity thing? Because say we have the 20 million debt ceiling only for auctions, then it won't be used most of the time, and we still have the same risk of like collapse in the like same risk of the USDC like having a massive issue and people.
But the risk teams need to come back with with the portfolio, right? Like or they need to protect the portfolio. They don't need to protect individual aspects. Like it's the safety and security of the entire collateral pool. And so I think, Cyrus, and correct me if I'm wrong, more or less speaking for you, but isn't the point that the protocol needs to be able to absorb whatever additional risks USDC brings to the table, and therefore that sets the parameters that the governance ecosystem needs to be voting on, right? And so the idea is that it just gets limited to a specific amount of fallout.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, that principle still holds. I think this is more of like a technical question of how can we prevent Maker from being exploited in otherwise normal times. So I think it's the concept is somewhat tangential to the current conversation, but presumably, so like to answer LongForWisdom's question, like a super inefficient way of achieving what we want is to have the collateral type for auctions, for auction keepers added, but have the debt ceiling set to 0. And then when the time should arise that we need it, we could rally an emergency executive vote to increase the debt ceiling and provide that liquidity on super short notice. It just has to be turned on through an executive vote. My fear with that is that it would really be a race against time, given the auction dynamics and the GSM and just kind of the social coordination. Is that preferable to just having the debt ceiling of 20 million sit there unused for extended period of time? I'm not sure, but yeah, you're right about the exposure, about having it still have that exposure.
Yeah, but you say it's unused, but you got to remember what we were talking about before about flash loans or refinancings or substitutions. You don't know if it was used, right? I mean, it could easily be used right now to $10, $15 million in a block and repay itself. You don't even realize it. Depends on how flash loans can be constructed. It may very well be hitting those numbers right now.
We would still see the transaction on the blockchain after it completed. So, but
you'd still see a transaction, but I mean, if I'm just making up a theoretical, right? I mean, if somebody has collateral that's in ETH and they want to do in effect a flash loan that refis it to USDC, that then turns around to refis it against that, as an example, you could construct all of that in one transaction.
Yeah, my point is you can still see that transaction if it
correct.
fails. You can see it.
Correct, but setting that limit, if you lower the debt ceiling for USDC, you inhibit that substitution capability.
It's also worth, so maybe it's worth noting as well that the choice doesn't have to be like binary, right? We don't have to have 20 million of open debt ceiling for like auctions like all the time. Like we could have like 5 million or like 3 million open, but like always, and then we could react and add like another 17 million or something, like in the result of there being a crash, right? So then we have like 3 million immediately, which is our max risk in the case of USDC collapsing. And then we have like within like the GSM delay, we can have another like 17 million or whatever, right? So maybe that's worth considering.
100%, I agree with that. I mean, I think, and more than anything, I think it forces us, it rips off the Band-Aid for the first time of us having collateral that is off-chain and embracing, understanding, calculating what the risk profile is and what we should set our risk parameters around having something that is theoretically, able to be confiscated, which is the world we live in with any aspect of collateral that's not Ethereum ERC20 native. If we ever intend on bringing real estate in as collateral in any capacity, or stocks or bonds or treasuries, every one of those has custodian issues. Every one of those has the rule of law of whatever country and whatever jurisdiction is behind it. This just happens to force us to rip off the Band-Aid and address it and go through the calculations. That's a good thing. But having a low debt ceiling after it's no longer a need, but removing it as collateral, I don't think there's value in that. I think that's counterproductive. Keeping it there, but just constraining it with a low debt ceiling allows us to always increase it and keep that flexibility.
I mean, we may want to constrain its debt ceiling to something that would match our system surplus once we build that back up. That way, if we ever took a hit, it would just eat surplus, and that's a risk that MKR holders would have to calculate, but we wouldn't go into debt.
That's a good idea, actually.
I think we also need to consider like the practical governance aspects, because I'm looking at mkrgov.science right now, and the 87,000 MKR in support of the current spell, and then 61,000 and 53,000 on the next two. So if we keep expecting that we can just keep passing new executives, it seems like MKR is kind of getting spread out right now, and that might be an issue.
I guess maybe we need to say regarding the USDC thing, do we need to make immediate changes? I guess is the question. Like, Cyrus, do you think there's like serious danger of the current debt ceiling being used for like things that aren't auctions, and that's going to cause problems?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, the risk is, I mean, I think everybody understands the concept of the centralization risk. I'm certainly not a subject matter expert on that topic, so.
Yeah, no, I don't mean so much the centralization risk, more like we put it in to be there for like auctions, right? Like, do we need to make changes to ensure that we meet the original goal?
But was it there for only auctions? I mean, I don't want to rehash it, but I mean, there's a good argument to say that, you know, one of the prime objectives here should be to get the peg back to 1.00 and 5 other zeros. And it breaches above 101. Well, it's at 102 right now. So I'd say it's still useful to have it hanging out there because there's an arbitrage capability right now to help pull it down.
Yeah, I don't think anyone's disputing that, the benefits that it's bringing right now. But to answer LongForWisdom's question, I think we can all benefit from a little bit more research and just maybe taking a few more days to kind of properly process the situation before revisiting.
Yeah, I agree. There's still, Herna points it out in the sidebar. There's still postmortems. We're still kind of in the thick of it right now, and so we are shoring up the system. But there's going to be a pause for reflection, and then there's going to be documentations and postmortems and discussions about what just happened. Presumably next week, hopefully early next week, and I think that we'll be able to use that information to kind of inform what happens next. And then, as Brian points out, we have a regular governance cycle that needs to be addressed as well. So we can use these levers that we have to alter USDC over the coming weeks. And that sounded like me putting an end to things, and it might have been. We're at a half hour. We're at the hour and a half mark, actually. And so there's a decision to be made here. I know that a lot of people have lives that don't involve maker governance, sadly, and that there's lots of work to be done. I think I'll be ending the recording soon, but I'm open to leaving the call running for another half hour or so if they wanted to have a general Q&A session. I'm still wrestling with this behavior that I've identified where people tend to get a lot more opinionated when the recording stops, and that's great. We can have the permanent record, and then we can have a free-for-all afterwards. just among us.
Is it
that.
maybe worth talking about the PR thing before stopping the recording, or do you want to push that till tomorrow?
Well, it's entirely up to you. I think this is a very important topic, and I'm afraid that it might not get the attention it deserves if we just kind of cram it into the last few minutes. I don't know what you want to talk about, but I want to discuss a larger issue. So when things are happening quickly, we live in a space where hot takes are rewarded with followers, and that's not a great world to live in. And so it behooves the community and the foundation and me to pay attention to what the ecosystem is saying and what people are talking about. And I would dearly love to begin talking about how do we as a group help correct misconceptions, and how do we help the ecosystem find the information that they need, and how do we engage in healthy debates without, feeding the trolls and all the rest of it. So I think there's a lot of really important discussions to be had. Does that align with your thinking, LongForWisdom? I don't know what you wanted to talk about.
Pretty much, yeah. Just sort of, I mean, it was kind of that, and like, how do we, like, because currently we, like, the DAO is unable to like speak authoritatively, right? Like, we haven't got a process for deciding the things that we want to say, like, present to the outside world and like voting on them, or like, and like ratifying them or whatever. So
I love that. I think this is the next step in the
conversation
evolution,
was,
right?
Yeah, that's what we need to think about.
Yeah, if there's some group that would want to organize to be able to handle this kind of thing, and then we could build a bridge between the foundation and that group to help knowledge sharing, best practices, different venues for discussions, all kinds of. There's a lot of really good and important work that could happen here. That's not technical. That's non-technical, and plenty of resources in the ecosystem I think that we could bring to bear that have been previously unutilized. So yeah. So I prefer, if it's up to me, I prefer to maybe dedicate some significant time to it tomorrow in a call.
Yeah, that's reasonable for me. I mean,
right, cool.
I guess maybe it's one of the things is, do we still think we need the daily cadence at this stage? Do we think things are okay,
that's another good.
Or do we think
that's a good question.
Do we need to keep having daily meetings? Are we going to meet over the weekend as well?
Bitcoin's mooning, so everything's fine. Let's just all go back to Netflix. Is that? I don't know. I'm comfortable with having another one tomorrow, maybe to just review auctions and stuff. But
yeah,
I'm also fine with saying, okay, we're out of the woods for now, at least for the moment. I don't know.
Maybe we review tomorrow. Maybe have a short call, and then, I mean, I'm guessing people don't want to meet over the weekend, so maybe we leave those two, and then potentially do one on Monday if things are horrible again.
Yeah, I don't know what the size of the ask is. Look, this is my life, and so another call tomorrow, whatever. But if the community doesn't have the appetite for it, we can skip. But I think that there's, people aren't forced to join. So yeah, we don't really need to debate it all that much. Let's just have a call tomorrow, and we'll talk about PR and how the auctions went and stuff like that.
Yep.
Okay. All right. I think I'm going to leave it there. Unless there's a massive outpouring of interest in the sidebar in the next 10 seconds, but a desire to keep on having or allow the call to continue, I'll probably stop the recording and shut it down. Thanks everyone for joining. Thanks for your continued attention to the safety and security of the protocol. I touched on this yesterday, I think. Did I get sentimental? I might have. The tremendous outpouring of interest and activity and the community pulling together to do things like the syndicate and additional UIs and coordinating PR and just discussing these issues in the forums has been heartwarming, actually. If you have to believe I have a heart, trust me, I do. And it has been warmed by this activity. So I want to thank everybody for coming out and helping us all in this time of need. All right. Talk to everyone tomorrow.